Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Final Disaster. This is Battlefield 1. In today's weapon review, we're going to be taking a closer look at the Cei-Rigotti Trench and Factory variants. DMRs, of course, exclusively available to the Medic class in Battlefield 1. We're going to be looking at their stats, their base properties, when and where to use them, whether or not this is a close, medium, or long-range DMR, maybe a more flexible one, and of course, how to make the best out of this weapon on the battlefield. Now, before we get started with today's video, today's stats of the two weapons we're looking at, very similar weapons, I wanted to point out that basically the only difference, as I will illustrate later, between these two weapons is that the first, the Cei-Rigotti Factory, has a quicker spread decrease. Whether or not that is useful is up for you to decide. It's difficult to, of course, measure and practice. While the Cei-Rigotti Trench has better hipfire, and this is universal hipfire, whether that is while standing, while crouching, while moving or not moving. Hipfire is always better with the Cei-Rigotti Trench. With that bit of information then out of the way, let's move on to the Cei-Rigotti's stats. Starting off with the damage model, of course, with a maximum damage of 38 and a minimum damage of 28 here. We've got a relatively heavy hitting DMR, which does consistent damage at all ranges, with a 3-shot kill all the way out to 36 meters, from which on you will be needing 4 bullets to kill your enemies. The fire rate is relatively high at 299 rounds per minute, making this gun, at least in my opinion, still close quarter capable, much like some of the previous close quarter DMRs we've looked down. However, unlike some of the close quarter DMRs we've looked at previously, the muzzle velocity on this DMR is relatively good at 700 meters per second. At least considering the fire rate that you've got, you'd expect a lower value here. Nevertheless, you can definitely hit your targets even at range when they're moving with this weapon. Moving then on to the magazine size of this weapon, this is sadly one of the weaknesses of it. Not only that it only has 10 shots available to it, but as we will cover later, the way this gun is reloaded is in a traditional fashion, that is to say single bullets or strips instead of the entire magazine. Moving on then to the foreshadowed reloads, they're relatively lengthy, that's no surprise, and you're going to be reloading relatively often. Now, as we always do, because there's so many different times that reloads can take in Battlefield 1 with the weapons that require different processes to reload them, I've only got you 2 values here. Basically, a single bullet reload is always going to take you 2.067 seconds, whereas a strip clip reload will take you about 3.067 seconds. Now, different combinations and in different situations will vary this time considerably, but the essence that you need to get from this is essentially when you're reloading this weapon, which you will be doing relatively frequently, it's going to take quite a bit of time, and you're going to have to pay attention, because you only have 10 shots to begin with, that you don't run out of bullets when facing enemies on the battlefield. With that being said, then let's move on to recoil next. With 0.7 degrees upwards, that's vertical recoil, and 0.32 to the left and 0.32 to the right. A typical first shot multiplier for DMRs, of course, standard at 1, meaning of course that there is no increase in recoil for your first shot. This is standard for DMRs. Basically, you've got a medium amount of recoil here is what I'd like to say. If you try to fire this weapon at medium to long range and you're trying to firing at pretty much close to the 299 round per minute mark, you're probably not going to be able to quite get there. You're going to have difficulties keeping your targets in sight, at least in my experience and in my opinion. If you fire the weapon slightly slower, maybe around about 250 rounds per minute, this is of course now an estimate, or targets are closer to you, be that either in close quarter or medium range, usually recoil doesn't get into the way. Recoil in general in Battlefield 1 isn't a huge deal. It wasn't in Battlefield 4 either, and it certainly isn't in Battlefield 1. Almost all weapons are relatively easily controllable, with many weapons actually having a laughable amount of recoil. Last but not least then, let's talk about the accuracy of this weapon. With a base ADS of 0.21, this DMR has got a standard accuracy value, to say the least. It's going to be accurate enough for most purposes. Intense, it's obviously not got the accuracy of something like a Selbstlader M1960 Marksman or a Mondragon Sniper. That's because of course it's geared towards the more medium range close quarter combat. By the way, these values are identical for the Cei-Rigotti Factory and Trench variant, as have all the values we've discussed up until this point. Where these two weapons start to differ is when it comes to the hipfire values. Now, if you're hipfiring your gun standing and moving at the same time, you're going to be facing 2.5 of an ADS with the Cei-Rigotti Factory versus a 1.5 for the Cei-Rigotti Trench. This is why I personally, having tried both weapons, prefer the Cei-Rigotti Trench, because I don't find spread decrease to be too much of a problem. I don't find this weapon, as we will discuss in just a moment, to be too practical for longer range shootings. Prefer it from medium to close range, where the base ADS and the spread decrease is sufficient. However, when I get into close quarter with this weapon, which I inevitably do because I'm trying to go for revives and for objective points, I I could definitely benefit from the more accurate hipfire of the Cei-Rigotti trench version. With that being said, then let's move on to the general gameplay associated, as playstyle associated with these weapons, and whether or not you should be using them. Starting off then with playstyle. Now, the Cei-Rigotti is one of the few DMRs in Battlefield 1 not specifically designed for a very limited engagement distance. It's not limited to extreme close quarter only, it's not limited to medium range only, and it's not limited to long range only. That is to say, at long range, this weapon, simply because we are talking about an iron sights weapon, likely isn't going to be your preferred choice. However, at medium range and close quarter, it's a very capable weapon, at least on a one-shot target basis, I would argue, because frankly, the reload of this weapon really is what keeps it back. The Cei-Rigotti is a stable damage output, good accuracy, and relatively easy to use at all ranges. The only problem really is you keep on running out of bullets and find yourself in a very lengthy, long reload process that basically either gets you killed or make sure that you're not going to get the kills you could have been getting had you had another weapon that would either reload faster or had more bullets to begin with. I'm speaking here, for example, of the autoloading extended if we're talking about close quarter, or maybe even the Selbstlader M1916 marksman if we're talking about something more long range geared. That's not to say that this weapon isn't usable. It's just very difficult because of the mentioned weakness regarding its magazine and reload to get the best out of it. That's not to say you shouldn't be using it, and especially those people longing for a little bit more of a flexible weapon will find the Cei-Rigotti, while challenging, very satisfying to use, and that's what I found using this weapon. It was very fresh and nice to pick up this weapon coming from the other DMRs because it is relatively unique in that it is flexible and usable at many different combat ranges and in different situations. I, at least, as you should have been able to see hopefully in today's gameplay, found it relatively enjoyable to use. Now, if you're new to Battlefield 1 or don't do very well with DMRs in general, this is not the weapon you should be using. This weapon truly is for somebody looking for something flexible as medic to allow him to assist his teammates both in close quarter and medium range, with the odd lucky kill maybe at longer-ish ranges, and is experienced as medic, knows how to hide his reload, knows how to when and where to get his reload off, and to play a bit of cover if he needs to stall, waiting for his gun to reload to engage your next enemy. Or alternatively to that, of course, be relatively confident in your use of your sidearm. With all that then being said, we're coming to the end of this video. My conclusion for the Cei-Rigotti is essentially it's a decent weapon, it's a good weapon, it can be tricky to use, very rewarding to use if you use it correctly. It's certainly not for those seeking an easy way to get a bunch of kills. It's more for those looking for a challenge that can be rewarding if used properly. This is not to say that this weapon is impossible to use, but to make sure that you're not at a disadvantage compared to some of these stronger DMRs out there is a challenge in itself. With that being said, I'd recommend you try this weapon out, especially those of you who like to be flexible in their medic play and not limited to either only close quarter or long range combat. But with all that being said, I'd like to thank you very much for watching. Leave your usual video suggestions down below, and I hope to see you in the next Battlefield 1 video.